Ask a CFI with the Pilot to Pilot podcast and Lift Flight Academy takes off now. Avination, what is going on? You're probably thinking to yourself, I think I just listened to Pilot to Pilot on Tuesday. Why am I hearing them on Thursday? Well, funny you should ask. We have a new series. This is brought to you in collaboration with Lift Academy and possibly some other flight schools in the future. But it is going to be Ask a CFI, where you have the opportunity to ask CFIs your questions. So if I'm not a CFI, so I have to branch out, reach out to flight schools and have them on to answer your questions, because I don't think you should trust someone that's not a CFI when you got some pretty intense questions asked. But today's episode is going to be about 20 minutes long, maybe 25, or it could be completely wrong. It could be 2 hours, but it's going to be about how to save money during flight training, how to get done with your training as quick as possible. So if you're really interested in this topic, go ahead and listen up. Ed Bagden from Lift Flight Academy has some great insight on how you can save money in your flight training. Avination, if you like today's episode, leave us a review on iTunes. Check us out on Patreon. Check our website out, pilottopilot.hq.com. That is all the links to our Instagram, our Twitter, our Patreon, everything. Go ahead and check it out and share this with all your friends. Without any further ado, here is Ask a CFI with Lift Flight Academy. Ed, what's going on? Welcome back to the Pilot to Pilot podcast.
Justin, it's great to be back on. It's been, almost a year since we last talked, and I had a great time last time. Happy to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you guys back, and I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. I'm excited about promoting Lift more and just getting more people aware of what you guys are doing and kind of the services you provide, and I think it's going to be a great episode.
Absolutely. It's been a wild year for us at Lift for sure. So, we started in September of 2018 with 12 students, and here we are today with over 270 actively enrolled, and certainly a lot of growth in the past year, but still a lot of increases in the overall quality of our program as well, which is just really exciting.
Absolutely. And what most people don't understand is that sometimes growth can be kind of a scary thing, especially if it comes too fast. If you're not prepared for all those students, then that could eventually be a bad thing. But it sounds like you guys are doing really well. You guys are taking everything in stride and coming out for the better on everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's growth is definitely, it's been a lot of fun for us, certainly a challenge, but I've got an incredible team, and the whole team at Lift, has really come together to make all this a reality and really just bring the best quality to market that we can.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm excited about this conversation that we're about to have, because this is quite possibly one of the more important things in aviation, and that's money. And it's how to get your training done as quick and the best training possible for as cheap as possible, because we all know there are certain flight schools that charge you an arm and a leg, and some may charge you a little bit less. But where do you find the big question is, where do you find when it's worth it? Where's the sweet spot? Do you want the G1000? Do you want just a standard 6-pack and all that kind of stuff? So I'm excited to dig a little deeper in this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So, you said quickly and as cheaply as possible. And, I definitely don't ever describe our training at Lift as cheap, but I think that when you look at speed and cost, I think you come up with an equation which is value, right? And what's the highest value training? When you're investing $1 in flight training, how do you make that dollar go the farthest? So I think that's really kind of probably the crux of the conversation that we can talk about today. So, when I look at that, I think that there's a couple things that come to mind immediately. One is, how regularly someone is training. So, students at Lift, they're flying or training at least, 5 days a week, every week. So that's a lot, and that's a big commitment. And I know for some people that may not be, a realistic commitment of time, but I think that making sure that you're in the training environment, whether it's the classroom, the simulator, or the airplane, at least once a week for any student anywhere is really important to being able to retain the information and to be able to kind of build on the past lessons to ensure that you're progressing every time that you're working on it,
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think that actually was a big impact in my career and my training, because I actually wasn't very consistent. So I had football that I had to deal with. I had to go back and forth, had to take a ton of chunks of time off. So I didn't have the ability to go train. So it hurt me a lot. And the fact that my consistency made me repeat lessons over and over and over again, where it then becomes more expensive when you repeat lessons. So I had to redo maneuvers, redo landings, redo all this stuff just because I wasn't comfortable and not ready to take that check ride. So I definitely agree that the more consistent you are, and then the better you're going to be, and the quicker, the cheaper that you'll get your training done.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And honestly, that's what we see through our data here at Lyft, through all of our students. It's, students that are unable to, consistently show up and consistently put the time in, whether it's at the academy or at home studying, are unlikely to, be successful candidates for what we do here. So having the ability to train regularly is a very, critical element to the success of a student.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you brought up the second point I wanted to bring up, and what is important, at least in my eyes, of getting your training done quickly and cheap, is making sure you're prepared for every lesson. And that comes with home studying, which is maybe not everyone's favorite thing to do, but you said you have data there that kind of backs that up, right?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, showing up at the airport, getting in an airplane and going and flying is, I think, why most of us have pursued this path. I mean, it's obviously the most fun part about a career in aviation, but the home study is equally, if not more important. Honestly, showing up for a lesson, you need to understand, completion standards for every maneuver that you're going to do. You need to know, what success looks like so you can target that. You need to understand your profiles, your setups, how you're entering into each maneuver. And also all the ground knowledge that backs all of that up. So if you don't have that kind of in your back pocket walking into every lesson, then odds are you're wasting time. And if we're wasting time, we're now wasting money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, when you aren't fully prepared for your lesson, that also leads into you being inconsistent in your training, which will then make you repeat lessons, which will then make you pay more money. So those kind of go hand in hand together in some way.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, for an instructor, especially when we get out of the first few lessons or when we introduce something for the first time, I mean, it really shouldn't be the instructor prompting the student to, configure the aircraft or get set up or even how to execute the maneuver. The instructor should really just be providing feedback on, how to improve or, best practices, tips and strategies, things like that, not actively teaching how to do the maneuver. That's really incumbent on the student to be able to know that going into a lesson. And, one of the things we introduced recently with our most recent February class at Lyft is kind of a procedures validation a couple weeks after starting. So a student needs to be able to sit down in front of a cockpit poster in the sim or, in an aircraft on ground power and demonstrate all the flows and checklists that we use. So I know that not every training environment uses, flows and checklists like we do in an airline, but here at Lyft, we do. And it's really important that we're not getting out to the airplane and spending, really important and, what can be expensive Hobbs time trying to work through a checklist, get the switches in the right position. That's really table stakes for going and doing any lessons. So that's something we're really trying to emphasize here because we know that can be a barrier to success in training.
This kind of goes into another part of it too. So obviously a big cost of this is going to be the plane that you choose to fly. Now, I know you guys fly kind of like the best equipment that you can possibly get. And you could probably find a cheaper airplane on the side. And I know you're going to say probably that it's best to fly the way you do, but what do you think about people at different flight schools that maybe have the opportunity to either train in a Cirrus or a Bonanza, maybe not a Bonanza, but like a 152 versus a 172 versus a G1000 and a six pack? Like, what are the importances of those, and when should a student choose maybe better avionics to learn off of rather than the cheaper route?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And like you said, we did choose our fleet because we wanted something that most closely mirrored what they're going to be flying on the Embraer 170, 175 at Republic. And, if someone's career oriented, if their goal is to head to, one of the regionals once they, accrue the hours they need, then I would say getting that exposure to glass cockpits is going to be really helpful. As modern pilots, I mean, this. It's, stick and rudder. You can never get away from that, but we're very much, systems managers as well. And, learning automation and modern avionics as a fundamental concept, primacy is is a lot in aviation, or really when you're learning anything. So, making those concepts and those skills prime, I think, is really important. Now, you bring up cost, which, I think that my answer to that would be, lift brings value to the flight training world that honestly, flying the best equipment at the best value that's been seen in decades is something that we have brought to market. But I think that demonstrates that you can kind of, have your cake and eat it too. You can find affordable flight training in a modern aircraft, but certainly there's a lot of options out there. But if your primacy is on a 6-pack 172, that's okay. But at some point down the road, you're going to need to learn the more advanced systems. And the best place to do that is not in sim training at the airline. It's going to be prior to that.
Yeah, you have a lot going on at those moments, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and I like what you said about how a lot of times a pilot can be a system manager. And more importantly, you have to recognize when a system and when automation goes wrong, because maybe in a 6-pack, you don't have as much automation as you do, or maybe G1000 brings more automation and you got to sit back and monitor things and know what to do when things fail. Because let's be real, when we're in a pilot, not everything works every single time, like you have to do more than just fly the plane. You have to read a QRH, a QRC, you have to decipher information. You have to figure out why it's doing what it's doing and how to fix it. So it's important to kind of get those situations in maybe a higher tech airplane, like you said, before you go to your check ride for Republic or before you go do something bigger with your career. So it's important to get that stuff down now. And I liked what you said about how you can bring value and how you can kind of have your cake and eat it too with the value that Lyft has with the Diamond. So, it's definitely something for people to look into and figure out what you value more. Is it cheaper? Do you want to be as cheap as possible? Or do you want to try to find something in the middle that offers the best for the right amount of money? Or maybe if you really want to be that person that's flying that gets a type ride and a Cirrus Vision Jet for their first plane, So you have to figure out what works best for you.
Absolutely. And, you're talking about automation. I think something that every pilot should be aware of is the concept of, we call it CAMI at Republic. Some airlines may call it something different, but, confirm, activate, monitor, and intervene. So when you're receiving a clearance, initially confirming that you understand the clearance. And if you have got another pilot that you're working with, maybe verifying with them, activating the input on the automation, ensuring that you actually selected the right button and looking at your, flight guidance panel, ensuring that you have the right lateral or vertical mode selected, monitoring the automation to ensure that it's, doing what you instructed it to do. And then obviously the oftentimes most important step is intervening and clicking the disconnect on the autopilot and putting the airplane where it needs to be, aviate, navigate, communicate. CAMI, I think, is something that keeps people, where they want to be. It keeps you in the green. And it's just a really important philosophy that we drill at Lyft, we drill it at Republic, and we could avoid, as an industry, so many pilot deviations if people were diligent about following that philosophy.
Yeah. And sometimes the most important thing you can possibly do is click off automation and hand fly the plane. If you don't like what it's doing, hit the red button, stop it, and just you fly it. Now you're in control,
Yeah, I think, anybody who's flown an automated airplane can think about the person who, sees the automation. I think we've probably done it ourselves, not doing what's expected. And you end up, you're pressing a bunch of different buttons trying to get it to work. And the easiest thing to do is just to kind of revert back down to that simple level of flying and click it off.
Yeah, agree. I think there was an American Airlines training video about that like 10 years ago where they said, hey, the most important thing when you don't understand automation is take a step back from automation, come back down, go back a decade and just hand fly. You can fly the plane. That's why you're up there. Don't let the computer tell you what to do. You tell the computer what to do. So I think that's definitely important for people in their training too.
The Children of the Magenta video, I think, is what that's called. I don't know if it's on YouTube, but it's a good one.
It is definitely a good one. I need to try to get that guy on the podcast.
For sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. So training can definitely be expensive. Are there any, I know we talked about kind of self-studying. Are there any do you at Republic recommend other tips for people to train? Is it all kind of Republic material or Lyft material? Or is it going to be like, hey, if you're really struggling with this, you can go check out some YouTube videos or you can check out these books and stuff like that?
There's a ton of great resources out there nowadays. And I think that, we try to provide everything a student needs to be successful here. But I would also encourage any student, whether at Lyft or elsewhere, to, delve out into the incredible resources that we can get on the internet. And I think a lot of people are probably familiar with, People like Bold Method, they produce some fantastic content through their videos and their website. I love what they do. And, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I think that when it comes to studying, if you're in an environment where there's other students, I think working in pairs or in groups is incredibly valuable. That's another thing that, we do at the airline. The people that study as a group have a high likelihood of being successful. The people that go off on their own and try to do it all themselves a lot of times struggle. So working with others. And if you're a private pilot, maybe somebody's working on instrument or commercial, maybe they're working on CFI, great opportunity to sit down with them and, capitalize on each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And I like that you said in groups, you can also push and challenge each other. So maybe someone's better at navigation than you are. Maybe someone's better at reading maps than you are, knows regulations better. It's like, all right, now you know that where you need to work, what you need to work on. If you don't ever have a group or have someone to voice your opinions with or talk to, you don't know what you're weak at. You don't know what you need to know. Be like, oh my gosh, he knows that so much better than I do. I need to be like that. So it definitely can push you and motivate you to be better and to study harder.
Yeah, I don't think that, anybody should be giving really their first hour of instruction when they're out there with a wet CFI certificate, giving their first hour dual given. If you can practice that instructional delivery earlier, you're going to be a lot more well prepared when you finally have that CFI cert and you're out there teaching.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's something that I feel like you kind of also need to be careful who you take information from, because especially if you're that private pilot or you're getting your privates, like make sure you trust the person you're getting that information from, because there's a lot of people that think they know, but they really don't know.
That's a great point as well. That's something that I agree wholeheartedly with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ed, I think that's some great quality information about trying to make things cheaper and do things as quick as possible and kind of get your career. You have this goal to be an airline pilot or corporate pilot, whatever it may be, and you have this opportunity to do it as cheap and as great as possible. And I think those are good points. Is there anything else you want to touch on and bring up?
It was great talking today. I think that getting this information out there is incredibly important. Encourage everybody to check out our website at, flywithlift.com. But, obviously, as you said today, there's a number of different paths students can take. So just making sure that, training occurs regularly, that you have access to the aircraft and the instructors, that's going to be what really helps you achieve your goals.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you said, be consistent. Do self-study and just pick the best aircraft and the best situation for you. You really need to do your research and make sure you're at the right place, which it could be a Lift Academy.
I hope it is.
Yeah. Well, perfect, Ed. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for talking about some of the stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to talking to you soon. See you, Justin.
Perfect. And that is a wrap on the very first episode of Ask a CFI with a Lift Flight Academy. I want to give a special shout out to Egg Bagdon. He had some great insight today on how to save money in your flight training. This is something I'm excited about. This is something I think can bring some real value to the podcast and to the space. So if you have a question for a CFI, remember it's not me, it's going to be someone else. Go ahead and email me, pilotthepilothq@gmail.com. And you never know, your question might be answered on the Pilot the Pilot podcast. Avination, that's all I have for you today. As always, happy flying.